Sign it, my aunt said. It's just paperwork. Gran would have wanted this. It was a Tuesday in late November, the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you even open the front door. I was standing in Gran's kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself and the calendar from 2019 still hanging by the fridge, because nobody had the heart to take it down. My aunt was at the table with a folder in front of her, looking at me. The way you look at someone you've already decided is a problem. I was 31 years old. I worked as a paralegal at a small firm in Ottawa, and I'd just driven 4 hours through a snowstorm to attend my grandmother's estate meeting, which I was now realizing had been scheduled on a Tuesday morning, specifically because my aunt knew I'd be the only one who'd have to rearrange her whole week to get there. My cousin was already seated. He had that look he gets, relaxed, comfortable, like the outcome of every room he walks into has already been decided in his favor. He'd flown in from Vancouver the night before. He was staying at the Marriott. I was sleeping on Gran's couch under the quilt she made me when I turned 8. What exactly am I signing? I asked. The variance form, my aunt said. It confirms that the estate distribution has been agreed upon by all parties. It's standard. I picked up the document. I read it slowly. The way you do when you've spent 3 years learning that language like this is never actually standard. It wasn't standard. The form was asking me to waive my claim to a specific account, a trust account Gran had set up through her credit union in 2009. I hadn't known about it. No one had mentioned it at the lawyer's office the week before, which was where I'd been told the estate was straightforward and already divided. What's the balance on this account? I asked. My aunt waved her hand. It's negligible. Old account. Probably just the minimum to keep it open. Gran forgot to close it years ago. My cousin didn't look up from his phone. I didn't sign. I want to tell you that I had some dramatic reason, that I sensed something, that I had a feeling. But honestly, I didn't sign because I was tired and the drive had been long and I wanted a coffee before I agreed to anything. I said I needed to read everything first and I'd let her know by end of week. My aunt's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She said, "Don't make this complicated, sweetheart. It's what Gran wanted." I drove back to Ottawa with the folder on my passenger seat. I stopped at a Tim Hortons outside Brockville. I ordered a medium double-double, and I sat in the parking lot and I called my boss, who is one of those people who always picks up. "Hey," I said, "can I ask you something weird?" Gran died in September. Lung cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by fall. The kind of timeline that makes you feel like the calendar itself is being cruel. She was 79. She'd lived alone in that house in Kingston since my grandfather died in 2004. And she'd done it with a stubbornness and a warmth that I'm still not sure how she managed to hold together in the same body. I was close to her. Closer than my cousin. Closer than my aunt, though they would never have said that out loud because in our family, proximity is only acknowledged when it's convenient. I called Gran every Sunday. I drove down for Thanksgiving and Easter, and sometimes just because I wanted to sit in her kitchen and listen to her complain about the neighbor's dog. When she got sick, I took 2 weeks of unpaid leave and stayed with her while my aunt organized the care schedule from Toronto. My cousin, I'll call him by what Gran called him, which was that boy, had visited twice in the last 5 years. Once for Christmas 2021. Once when Gran went into the hospital in August and it looked like the end might be coming faster than expected. He stayed 3 days. He went back to Vancouver. He texted me to say he was gutted and that he was there for whatever I needed. I didn't need anything from him. I needed Gran to not be dying, and he couldn't help with that. After she passed, my aunt took over. She was Gran's daughter, my mother's sister, and she'd always had that quality of moving very efficiently through other people's grief. She had a lawyer by October. She had a meeting scheduled by November. She called me to say the estate was simple, really, and that Gran kept things tidy. What she did not say, Gran had been keeping things tidy for a very long time, including a trust account that, according to the credit union statement I finally got a copy of, had been opened in 2009 with an initial deposit of $40,000. My boss called me back the next morning. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He pulled the credit union's publicly available trust registration records. Nothing private, nothing I couldn't have found myself if I'd known to look. The account my aunt had described as negligible and probably just the minimum to keep it open had a balance of $214,000. Gran had been depositing into it quietly for 15 years. Small amounts mostly. 2,000 here, 5,000 there. She'd never mentioned it to anyone as far as I could tell. Not to my aunt. Not to my mother, who'd passed 4 years before Gran. Not to me. But here was the thing that made my hands go cold on the steering wheel when my boss led it to me. The account had a named beneficiary, my mother, and my mother had died without updating the designation, which meant, under Ontario estate law, the account fell to my mother's estate, which meant it fell to me. My aunt had known. She had to have known. The credit union would have sent notification to all parties withstanding after Gran's death. That's standard procedure. She'd sat across from me in that yellow kitchen and handed me a form and told me it was negligible and that Gran would have wanted this, knowing the whole time that this was $214,000 of my inheritance. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't call her. I didn't call my cousin. I went to work. I filed some motions. I ate lunch alone at my desk. And I thought about the fact that Glenn had been putting money away for 15 years quietly, without fanfare, into an account she'd named for my mother. I thought about what that meant. I thought about the yellow curtains and the 2019 calendar and the quilt she made me when I turned 8. And then I started pulling documents. Here's what nobody tells you about estate fraud. It is extraordinarily common and extraordinarily easy because most people trust their families. I didn't have to do anything dramatic. I didn't have to hire anyone or file anything or make accusations I couldn't support. I just had to read. My job is essentially reading. Reading documents and noticing when something doesn't match something else. The estate lawyer my aunt had hired was a generalist in Toronto. Not incompetent, but clearly operating under the assumption that this was an uncomplicated file with cooperative parties. He'd prepared a distribution summary based on information my aunt had provided. The trust account was not on it. I called him. I told him about the account. I told him about the beneficiary designation. I gave him the credit union's reference number. There was a pause on the line. I wasn't provided that information, he said. I know, I said. He asked if I'd be willing to provide the documentation directly, which I was. I also forwarded him the credit union statement, the beneficiary designation form with my mother's name on it, and the letter I drafted. Carefully, professionally, in the language I'd spent 3 years learning, outlining the legal position. Then I waited. My aunt called me 4 days later. She called me on a Sunday evening, which told me everything I needed to know about how she was feeling, because she is not a person who makes difficult calls on weeknights. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said. About what? I said. About the account. I thought it had been wound down. I must have had old information. The credit union sent notifications to all beneficiaries withstanding, I said. In October. That would have included you as executor. Silence. I may have misread the correspondence, she said. I had my boss on the other line. He'd offered to listen in case I needed a witness. I appreciated that more than I said. I have the statement here, I said. The account hasn't been touched since Glenn opened it. The balance is $214,000. The name beneficiary is my mother, which under Ontario law passes to her estate, which passes to me. I've shared all of this with the lawyer. Another silence. Longer this time. You're making this very difficult, my aunt said, and her voice had that quality now. The one that used to make me feel small when I was 12. The one that said, you are causing a problem that would not exist if you were easier to deal with. I thought about the form she'd put in front of me at the kitchen table. Sign it. It's just paperwork. I'm not trying to make it difficult, I said. I'm trying to make sure Gran's wishes are actually carried out. She hung up. The meeting happened 3 weeks later. Not in Kingston, this time. At the lawyer's office in Toronto, a boardroom with a glass wall and a view of the financial district and the kind of coffee that comes out of a machine and still somehow tastes like it cost $14. My aunt arrived with my cousin. He was wearing a jacket I recognized, the kind that people wear when they want to look like they're not trying. He shook my hand. He said, "Good to see you," in a tone that suggested it was not particularly good to see me. My aunt had brought her own documentation. She sat down and opened a folder and slid a paper across the table to the lawyer. It was a handwritten note on Gran's stationery stating that she wished the trust account to be distributed equally among family. I looked at it. I'd seen Gran's handwriting hundreds of times. Sunday cards, Christmas tags, the little notes she tucked into care packages. This looked close. But Gran always wrote her sevens with a crossbar, a habit she'd picked up from her own mother, who'd learned to write in a European school. The sevens in the dollar amount on this note didn't have crossbars. I didn't say anything yet. I watched the lawyer review it. I watched him set it aside. Then I said, "Could I ask when this note was written?" My aunt said, "Gran gave it to me before she passed." I found it with her papers. "Do you know approximately when?" I said. "Month, year?" "I'm not sure exactly. Sometime this year." I nodded. "Is there any other documentation with it? An envelope? Anything with a postmark?" My aunt said there wasn't. I reached into my bag and I took out my phone. Specifically, I opened the photo roll to a series of pictures I'd taken in Gran's house the weekend before the estate meeting, when I'd been there to collect a few of her things. I'd photographed the kitchen, the living room, her desk. I'd photographed her desk specifically because it was covered in papers and cards, and I'd wanted to have a record before everything got sorted. One of those photos showed the stationery pad. The full pad, you could see the top sheet and part of the second sheet, and neither of them had been written on. I showed the photo to the lawyer. "The note uses paper from a pad that was blank as of the 3rd of December, I said. "According to the metadata on this photo, which shows date and time of capture, Gran passed in September." The room went very quiet. My cousin put his phone face down on the table. My aunt said, "That doesn't prove anything." "You're right," I said. "It doesn't prove anything on its own. But taken with the omission from the estate summary and the beneficiary designation and the fact that the account wasn't disclosed to the lawyer, it raises some questions I think are worth answering." The lawyer cleared his throat. He said he'd need to review everything with the estate separately. He said it in the way that lawyers speak when they're being very careful not to say what they're actually thinking. My aunt looked at me across the table and I thought of the kitchen and the yellow curtains and the form she'd put in front of me on a Tuesday in November and told me to sign. "You could have just talked to me," she said. I said, "I tried. I won't draw it out." The estate was resolved through the lawyer over the following 6 weeks. The note was deemed insufficient to alter the beneficiary designation, which was a legally binding document. The credit union confirmed the account status. My aunt did not pursue the matter further, which I take to mean that she understood the exposure she'd created for herself by presenting that document. The $214,000 came to me in February, deposited into an account I'd opened for the purpose. I sat at my kitchen table in Ottawa and looked at the confirmation number on the screen for a long time. It didn't feel like winning. I'm not sure what it felt like. Something adjacent to grief, actually, because money is not what I wanted from Gran. What I wanted I already had: the Sunday calls, the kitchen, the quilt, the years. But Gran had put that money away for a reason. She'd named my mother. She'd been doing it quietly and consistently for 15 years, and I think she understood something about the way families move around money, how it reveals things that people prefer to keep hidden. I think she'd watched my aunt her whole life and made a calculation. She just didn't account for the possibility that my mother would go first. I called my cousin once after it was over. I didn't expect much. I got about what I expected. He said he hadn't known about the note, which may even be true. He said he was sorry things got complicated. He said, "You know how she is." I said, "I do." My aunt and I have not spoken since the boardroom. I don't expect that to change. There's a version of the story where I feel guilty about that, where I wonder if I should have let it go, kept the peace, been easier to deal with. I've sat with that version. I understand its appeal. But Gran spent 15 years building something for my mother. And when my mother couldn't receive it, it came to me. The least I could do was make sure it arrived. My firm offered me a raise that spring. I took it. I also called a financial planner for the first time in my life, which Gran would have found extremely amusing. She kept her savings in a jar under the kitchen sink until 1987 and never entirely trusted banks after that, which makes the credit union account feel, in retrospect, like a significant act of faith. I still have the quilt. Some things you hold on to not because they're worth anything, but because they're the proof that someone chose you, quietly, consistently, before anyone was watching. That's worth more than a signature on a form in a yellow kitchen. That's worth more than anything she put in an account. I keep thinking about that Tuesday morning. The yellow curtains, the folder on the table. The way my aunt said, "It's just paperwork," with such ease, such confidence, like she'd rehearsed it, or like she'd said it enough times to people who nodded and signed that she'd forgotten someone might not. That's the thing about people who count on you not paying attention. They mistake kindness for carelessness. They see someone who doesn't make scenes, who drives 4 hours through a snowstorm and sleeps on a couch under a childhood quilt, and they think she won't look too closely. She trusts us. She'll sign. What my aunt didn't account for was that I'd spent 3 years learning exactly what language like standard and negligible is designed to do. It's designed to move your eyes past the thing that matters. And I almost let it. I was tired. The drive had been long. I wanted coffee. That's all that saved me. Honestly, not some dramatic instinct, not a sudden flash of suspicion. Just fatigue and a medium double double and the habit of reading before I agree to anything. I think about Gran a lot now. 15 years of quiet deposits. No announcement, no explanation. Just a number going up, slowly, in an account she'd named for my mother. That's not an accident. That's a woman who understood her family clearly, who loved them anyway, and who was also realistic enough to build something that couldn't be talked away at a kitchen table. There's a version of integrity that gets a lot of attention. The dramatic kind, the confrontational kind, the kind that flips tables and makes speeches. Glan's version was quieter. She just kept showing up. She kept putting money away. She kept the account open for 15 years without telling anyone, which is its own kind of courage. The courage to do the right thing without needing anyone to witness it. I try to hold on to that. The part of the story that I actually want to carry forward isn't the boardroom or the photo metadata or the moment my cousin put his phone face down on the table. It's Gran at her desk writing a deposit slip, doing it anyway, doing it again next month. The hard thing about being the one who reads the fine print is that it costs you something. You lose the comfortable version of your family. You trade the story where everyone meant well for the one where someone sat across from you and lied to your face and called it love. That's not a small thing to lose. But I also know that I kept the account open. Not financially. I mean, I kept the version of myself that reads before signing, that asks one more question, that doesn't mistake silence for agreement. That's the thing worth protecting. Not the money, the clarity. The willingness to stay in a room with an uncomfortable truth and not look away from it. Gran built something for my mother. My mother couldn't receive it, so it came to me. I think about what that chain of care looks like across time. One woman putting something away for another, not knowing exactly how it would land, just knowing it should exist. I still have the quilt. I still have her handwriting in my memory. The crossbar on every seven. Some things get passed down in documents, some things get passed down differently. I know which ones I'm keeping.